Well, it's been a massive couple of weeks for Collingwood supporters and an even bigger one for my next guest. Coming to the helm of the club at the beginning of the year, Darcy Moore quickly made waves as captain for all of the right reasons. From that impressive speech after Anzac Day to leading the Magpies out to victory in his 150th game, it seems like there isn't much Darcy can't do, and that's just not only on the footy field, although that's really where we were watching very acutely. Darcy Moore joins us this morning. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, PK. Great to be here. It has been an enormous few weeks, as you can
I was
imagine.
about to say, I feel like you can talk to Radio National now. You've sort of dealt with your hangover and you're fully able to talk to us, right?
Yes, exactly. I've got my capacities back after partying with the team, and yes, I'm ready to talk to you.
Now, your father is obviously the legendary two-time Brownlow medalist, Peter Moore. What I loved about your win is that you said you finally did something your dad couldn't. And that's when you live in the shadow of a really successful parent, that's often kind of one of the great moments. How did that feel to surpass his legacy?
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't think I really cared about it much before, but I said it. I couldn't help saying it about 2 or 3 times after we won. So it must have gone through my mind at some point. But no, it was really special. So Dad not only failed to win a premiership for Collingwood, but he played in 5 grand finals and lost 4 of them and drew 1. So he had a bit of a cursed record, and his era was sort of the era of the collie wobbles, when it was sort of told that there was bad juju with Collingwood in grand finals. So he had to deal with that sort of legacy during his time. But it's a pretty nice feeling that we've been able to go one better.
So how did you get over the collie wobbles? Like, you must have thought about it quite a lot going in. How did you overcome it? Was there some sort of mental process you went through?
I think it was a big time. It was bigger for the 1990 premiership, I think, because there was a fair few years between our last premiership and 1990, and then another premiership in 2010. So I don't think we've really suffered with that legacy as much in the modern day. But having said that, we lost in 2011 and lost in 2018. So it's those sort of things as a team, they're talked about around you a lot, and you're often answering questions about them, but they don't really infiltrate your process too much. But having said that, you lose enough of them, then it obviously plays on everyone's mind. So I think a good team is one that's aware of those things, but sort of resilient to them as well, isn't sort of consumed by those sorts of, really at the end of the day, superstitions.
Were you worried right up until the last couple of minutes that you might not actually win?
I think I wasn't worried all day. And then when Brisbane hit the front, Charlie Cameron kicked that goal. I knew there was enough time left. I knew the sort of, I think it was like 4 or 5 minutes, which in a football game is enough time to get a score. A little bit worried, but I mean, when Geordie de Goey just put one on the scoreboard pretty much straight away within 20 seconds, I knew then that we had what it took to hold on, like we've done so many times over the last few years.
Now, Bobby Hill, is he the best thing that's happened to Collingwood for a while?
I think his performance on Grand Final Day was definitely one of the best things to happen to Collingwood for a while. It was just amazing. Such a great, amazing, feel-good story for a man like him to coming off a testicular cancer diagnosis last year and then traded from the GWS Giants to us, and then just fitted in seamlessly into our team and brought such energy and so popular around the locker room as well. So it's really special, and he's definitely a fan favourite. I think at the grand final parade there were definitely more Bobby Hill posters than there were of anyone else. So it's pretty cool to see a young guy like that who's been through what he's been through see some success.
Now, we're Radio National. We do the heavy stuff, not just the match report. So I'm going to go there. Collingwood. It's been difficult to support Collingwood over the years for me because of some of the intense racism scandals, if I can be honest, that have engulfed the club and its response. In February 2021, the Do Better report was released and found the club guilty of systemic racism. I know that you were quite passionate about trying to change some of that. Do you feel like you have? Where's Collingwood at now?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's you're not alone in that. There were lots of supporters that said that found it difficult to support us, obviously, when those things are coming out. And you're right, it took a sort of a whole of club approach, and a lot of people to sort of say, we need to do some work it's in the name, right? We need to do better and find a way to make our club a place that not only everyone can support, but people can come in and everyone can thrive and everyone can succeed. And that's what the report showed, right? Was that there are certain barriers and processes in the way that we're operating that are making it harder and making it actively more difficult for diverse people to come in and succeed. So it's been a long process internally at the club in terms of employment strategies, in terms of taking a stance against racism when it happens, as well as encouraging conversations around things like cultural awareness and cultural understanding across the whole club. And one of the things about this space is you never arrive, you never get somewhere and go, all right, that work's done, let's move on. It's sort of a constant process of of working towards having the best organisation possible, which means somewhere that everyone can thrive. So I don't think you ever really get there. But having said that, seeing a First Nations man like Bobby beam like the sun on grand final day wearing the Collingwood colours means that I guess the club is doing something right in this space.
You were named captain at the beginning of this year at that time. What did you want to bring to the club with your leadership?
Yeah, it's interesting. I obviously took over from Scott Pendlebury, who's, played for the club and captained the club more than anyone else in the history, and sort of probably is the best player to ever play for the club. So that was always tricky. It wasn't taking over from the faceless predecessor. It was someone who's a real giant of our club and of our team. So I really wanted to lean on him a lot and be guided by him and make it a smooth transition. But I think naturally I'm a different person to Scott. I have sort of different interests and a bit of a different style, and I have a bit of a different story to him. So just by being myself, I felt like I was able to put, a new spin on things and give a fresh approach, and that's both internally. Obviously, a lot of our work is around helping the team function and doing what's right for the team, working closely with coaches and administrators to set up the environment and set up the team. And then externally, it's a lot around working with the public and the messaging around what the club's doing and telling stories to our fans and members, which is something that I think the club's done really well this year.
Now, you're not just a footballer, you're also studying a Masters in International Relations. How important is maintaining a life and, intellectual pursuits and career outside of football for you?
Yeah, for me, it's really massive. It's like I learned pretty early on in my career that to be absorbed in the game of AFL football and the whole culture and hype that surrounds it is actually really quite difficult to deal with. I found it quite difficult to deal with as a teenager, 18, 19, 20 years old, and thrust into this, what is in Melbourne, a pretty saturated media landscape and around football, and it can be really hard to deal with when you're still finding your way and trying to work with coaches and senior players and sort of work out where you fit in. It can be kind of hard. So having an outlet, which for me was studying at university, was really important. Even just the process of going onto campus and not being the centre of attention and not having the pressure of performance or media scrutiny there was a really nice release just once a week. And since I've advanced my studies, it's just become a real passion. So yeah, I'm studying Masters of International Relations and very much out of my depth with a lot of students who are a lot smarter than me and a lot more experienced in this space. Obviously, I work in a completely different sector to international relations. So it's been a really steep learning curve, but I suppose the athlete in me has also kind of loved that. I loved starting it and feeling like, oh, I'm out of my depth here, and I had to play a bit of catch up for a few months, which was a cool feeling. So still got a few years to go, but I'm really loving it.
Now, Darcy, we talked about the racism scandals that have engulfed Collingwood in the past. At the moment, our nation is grappling with a pretty big question around a referendum on a voice to Parliament. The debate's got pretty ugly. NRL superstar Nathan Cleary, who's also their captain, in another code, has come out in support of the voice. How do you feel about the proposal?
Yeah, to me, it feels like I agree with you about the campaign. It's been pretty hard to navigate, hasn't it? The information and some of the language coming out of the camps has been kind of hard to reconcile, and hasn't really felt like the healthy discussion around it that we probably hoped for at the start. But I'll be voting yes. To me, I feel like it's a intuitive next step and seems to be an important and practical way to help Indigenous Australians and recognise them in the Constitution. So there's sort of nothing in there that I'm in the wording of the question that seems to be problematic to me. It all seems pretty straightforward, and so I'll be voting yes.
Why don't you see it? I mean, some people on the no side have been arguing that it makes us, this is the argument, I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it, but the argument they're pushing is that it makes us unequal. It gives a special status to Indigenous people. Why don't you have that view?
Yeah, I think that that argument and the argument around division, creating division, I've sort of read about a bit, and I just sort of feel like to my mind, there's already sort of advisory bodies for Indigenous Australians that have come and gone as governments have changed. And so that's sort of, the mechanism has kind of already existed anyway. So by making it sort of permanent in the Constitution, it's just sort of locking it in. So it's in that way not anything new. And so if those bodies have always existed, then Aboriginal Australians will have already had those extra rights, which has never been a problem before, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's making sense, but because it's not anything radically new, it's not like First Nations Australians are suddenly going to have all these extra rights. That was sort of how I made sense of that argument.
What do you make of sports stars having a voice on these sorts of issues? Some people, I've seen the commentary, I'm sure you have too, you should stick to the football. What do you say to people who say stick to the football?
Totally. I mean, it's big in America, isn't it? That stuff, the shut up and dribble stuff with LeBron James. It's an interesting question. I mean, in Australia, we don't really have a very strong kind of activist culture, political activist culture amongst our athletes. And maybe it's something around just what we expect of sports people. We as a culture, and I think it's an interesting question. And you're right, there are certainly people out there that just want you to shut up and play sport. But we've seen all around the country, like you mentioned with Nathan Cleary, athletes are human beings and citizens of the country too, so they can exercise their right and say what they want to say, and they can do it in a really healthy way.
Would you like to change that culture?
I think naturally the younger generations it's becoming more and more of a thing in our society more generally. I see younger guys who are more passionate about issues, social issues, and using their voice to speak up about it, which I don't think is a bad thing. I mean, we've seen one of the massive things in the AFL in the last probably 5 or 6 years has been around the discussion around mental health, and specifically men's mental health. And we're seeing more players with their platforms speaking out about the struggles of men's mental health and working to destigmatise it and talk about the support they need. And I think if you think 10, 20 years ago, a generation ago, that would have never happened. And I know for a fact, there are a lot of men and footballers in particular who were struggling with those things and struggling in silence. So I think, that's maybe a marker of some change in that space. I think it's sort of happening naturally as these conversations are opening up.
Now, Darcy, before I let you go, I'm a diehard Collingwood fan, and clearly I want, my eyeballs were on your game and so many others were. But you know what? The Matildas actually beat your ratings. I just want you to reflect on that, because I know you went to a Matildas game when things were so hot during that time. What's going on?
Oh, it was incredible, wasn't it? It just felt like I went to actually 2 or 3 games. I was lucky to go to their Canada game in Melbourne as well. And it was amazing. It really felt like an important moment for women's sport in this country, didn't it? It had this really the raw excitement of the game, and the talent of the girls was obvious, but it was the movement around it and the excitement around it, and that this feels like a turning point, feels like something new was added a whole nother dimension to it for me. I just loved it. And I went to one of the games with my 9-year-old little niece, and I just kept thinking that when I was her age, the fact this just wouldn't have been possible. I wouldn't have been able to go to a stadium packed full of fans for a women's sporting event. So to take her along and have her experience that, I just thought that was so cool. So the generational part of it is really exciting as well. And I think a lot of the suits at AFL House took notice and have seemed to take some action on and answered the call to help grow the women's game, because I think that was a powerful example of what happens when you get it right, and that the country's interested and the country wants to get on board with women's sport. I think that's what it showed us. Like you said, what was the ratings number? 11 million people.
Ridiculous. It was so ridiculous. But it's so, like, all I can say is, and I know you'll agree with me, I keep hearing from male sports commentators that the AFL season is over. No, actually, there's an AFLW season going on. I'm going to games at the moment. There's more sport. Your victory was awesome, but It continues.
Totally. And I don't know if you caught the our Collingwood AFLW game against Brisbane last weekend, but the girls certainly took a leaf out of our book and had a really nail-biting come from behind victory. So it seems it's embedded in the club at the moment to scrape by the narrowest of margins.
Yeah, thanks. Make us nervous. Darcy, always a delight to talk to you. I try to not show bias because I think it's really important, but I am very biased for your team and your leadership. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, PK. Good on you. Thanks for having me.
Darcy Moore, Collingwood Football Club premiership captain, talking to us about a range of issues, as I say, RN, so not just a match report. We don't really do just a straight match report, do we? Although Warwick Hadfield brings it to you every morning, but with poetry as well, which we love him for.